Thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just have a few questions as promised at the end. And I hope that the world watching here sees that we're not going to be rolled here on this bill, on the Clarity Act, and that you have a lot of members who want to see a piece of legislation that truly protects consumers, people who have worked with the industry in the past on our side. That are interested in working on this, but really want to see some serious changes and are concerned both about the conflicts issue, are concerned, as Senator Booker, I'm going to ask my first question on this, about the funding issue of how the CFTC should do this, and are certainly concerned about the consumer welfare and what safeguards should be in place. And there's not loopholes that could, drive a truck through here. So that's kind of where it's not consensus. We have members with different views on this, but I do think that people should take home from this that we are going to want to see some major changes. So, Mr. Benham, you previously called for additional funding and staff for the CFTC to write rules for and oversee these markets. How important is it that Congress provide for durable, sufficient funding when it comes to these brand new markets? And I think just to combine my questions then with you, Mr. Lucan, one of the concerns is we've got derivative markets, we've got an economy that is on a roller coaster right now because of tariffs and other things. We don't want to disadvantage existing markets and market participants in how we do this. So it's a little bit the same question, but
Senator, very
go
quickly,
ahead.
thank you for the question. Short answer, it is an absolute priority. If you authorize a regulatory program but don't have the funding, it's just, there's no teeth there. I did a number of estimates internally when I was chair. We came up with about $130 million over the first few years to staff up both on the tech side and the personnel side. And to your last point, and I think this should resonate with everyone on the panel and on the committee, I cannot tell you how much personnel time was taken in the last few years of my chairmanship on crypto-related matters. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's zero sum. When you have those people working on crypto matters, which are novel, unique, and don't have legal precedent, it leaves them away from traditional markets, which I think we all agree are the core of what the CFTC does and the core of what this committee cares about on the ag side, the energy side, the metals, and financials.
Okay, thanks. And then Mr. Lucan.
And the question is around the funding and
Just
impact?
it's pretty much funding, because what's going to happen if resources are pulled too thin because of this major challenge coming in,
Sure.
in a good and bad way, but something that was going to have to be accomplished. And then you have these other things going on that you've always done,
Right.
they have always done at the CFTC.
Right. No, I think the agency certainly deserves full funding, and especially if they're taking on the new responsibility of digital commodities, they're going to need more funding to make sure that they can administer the act. That's something that has traditionally been through an appropriations process. I think the Clarity Act gives the ability a transitional fee that happens for 4 years. That, to me, makes some sense. I think once you start, if you start to put in a permanent tax on the industry, the concern is that you may start to impact hedgers, the people who are trying to utilize the markets, and taxing them instead of appropriating that through the appropriations process. So I do have concerns with putting in a transaction tax permanently. I think it's better suited through the appropriations process.
Mr. Kim, I'm just only smiling. I'm not going to get into the rescissions and what this means to many of us when we look at that process, what's before us now, and if we can ever trust it. Mr. Kim, Senator Marshall was talking about the need to make sure we protect against terrorist use of these commodities. I thought that was a good line of questioning, and I just have one thing to add. Are digital commodity market participant technologically capable of complying with these financial laws? Should Congress tailor the laws in any ways to account for unique features of these markets or this technology?
Thank you, Senator. I think the U.S. already has a robust AML CFT program through FinCEN, as I mentioned earlier. That said, I believe it's appropriate for the CFTC to be the regulator for digital commodities. And once that framework is established, Senator, I think there could be additional protections as need be. But what's been missing, as I mentioned, is that regulatory gap right now where the CFTC does not have that statutory authority to take a look at centralized intermediaries. And my testimony has been about the need to address that gap to ensure U.S. leadership, Senator.
So some mention has been made of the collapse of firms like MF Global and FTX, and it truly revealed how customer assets can evaporate when we don't have the adequate safeguards. In both cases, customer funds were commingled and ultimately lost in cascading failures that shook public confidence in financial markets. Start with you, Mr. Benham. What mechanisms would best guarantee that these assets are safe, even if prices of collateralized digital assets collapse? And how should Congress address these practices where firms reuse customer assets for their own purposes?
Thanks, Senator. Just very briefly, it really goes to the core principles and the rules that the CFTC applies in regulated institutions. MF Global was unique in the sense that it was a regulated entity and those funds were commingled outside of, in violation of the segregation rules. Some changes were made afterwards, but segregation rules, I think everyone would agree with on this panel, are sacrosanct to the CFTC, making sure customer money is protected and prioritized among house money and other customer money. And I think if you replicate what rules around customer seg are used for traditional CFTC markets in the digital asset market, we will be able to accomplish our goals around protecting customer money and digital assets.
Okay, thanks. Another question. We know that DeFi, the decentralized finance, raises novel regulatory challenges. So how should Congress approach decentralized finance platforms in regulatory frameworks?
Thanks, Senator. We had, at the CFTC when I was chair, we had a couple enforcement actions against DeFi protocols. And I do think there should be and needs to be a unique look at how DeFi platforms function relative to centralized platforms. But I am a firm believer that there needs to be some mechanism of regulation and oversight. DeFi platforms cannot live in a regulatory vacuum. There has to be some intersection with a regulator and a decentralized platform in order to have effective regulation. Otherwise, there will be a race to the bottom, essentially a race to DeFi to circumvent regulations.
Mr. Sexton, does the Clarity Act's DeFi exception, the exemption that's in there, concern you at all? Is it too broad?
Senator, thank you. I know that there are concerns expressed about the DeFi exception in the Clarity Act. I believe that Congress should give some instruction to the CFTC as to how to deal with these platforms going forward in legislation. And also, I think that the CFTC and the SEC should carefully examine together DeFi protocols and determine, as Chair Benham just indicated, how best to look at these protocols in the future and possibly come up with some type of regulatory oversight over them.
Okay. Do you want to add anything, Mr. Messett?
I think the DeFi exemption that's in the Clarity Act is one of its worst features. I think the first thing is we have to define what we mean. People use the term DeFi. It's not just an autonomous protocol. They're typically talking about, situations where you have a business that's actually the front end of that or managing that. So there's lots of touch points for regulation. DeFi should not get a regulatory pass. And we may need different rules, but we need to achieve the same regulatory objectives. One simple way to think about this is if we had a protocol that was for the treasury market, and that suddenly became the main way treasuries were traded, we wouldn't say, oh, well, we don't need to regulate it. We don't need to worry about it. So I think the key things are define what we mean, look at the touch points for regulation, because there are typically centralized actors acting in that space, and develop different rules if we need them, but achieve the same regulatory objectives.
Okay. Mr. Benham, the collapse, again, of offshore exchanges underscored how quickly gaps in the international monetary regulatory frameworks can put U.S. customers at risk with trading activity flowing across borders outside the reach of domestic agencies. The challenge, in addition to the other ones we laid out here, becomes ensuring robust protections for customer funds that are in this truly international market. How can the U.S. ensure that customer funds are protected in a global market where trading often occurs on offshore exchanges beyond U.S. oversight?
Thanks, Senator. We have been a bit behind other regulators across the globe, and I think that's created arbitrage opportunities. Also, these international platforms who don't feel like they have a path to registration in the U.S. for a variety of reasons are circumventing essentially what are called VPNs or virtual private networks to get access to U.S. customers. I firmly believe that as the committee moves forward and the Congress moves forward with a market structure bill, if drafted correctly and comprehensively, this will bring the market within the regulatory fold, and that will provide the customers that you're talking about the protections that they deserve and that we need to have on a sort of outcomes basis, as Chairman Massett said. So regulation, as we take steps, will resolve these issues in part and hopefully comprehensively with other global regulators.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to have to go to something else. I see Senator Warnock is here. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this sort of bipartisan hearing, and so everyone could listen to the witnesses' ideas, and we look forward to working with you and with the rest of the committee going forward. So thank you very much, and consider my last comments my closing.